everybody. I didn't really understand what Ulf said, but something about some hardcore course, and yeah, that's what I've been doing here for the last 3 years. My name is Carsten Orthbandt, and I'm from Germany. I've been in the games industry for quite a while, since 1993. And I've had my share of experience with startup companies. My current company, Pixeltamer, has been founded in 2007. Actually, we started out in 2006, and then we formally built that company in 2007. We are doing contract development for online games, as broad as that topic may be. So we provide white label development services for virtually everybody. We've been doing Facebook games, we've been doing console games, we've been doing PC games, we're doing basically everything. I've been working with all the major publishers worldwide and helping them to build better online games, or better online parts for their games. Now, I've been asked to talk about my experience as a startup founder. And I'd actually like to go into the topics that aren't really that much centered around game development itself, because you are getting a pretty good education for game development itself here at HTO, which is one of the reasons why I like teaching here. But I'd like to focus on the things that can go wrong, and have been going wrong for quite a few startups in the past that maybe you're not hearing so much about here at HTO. The most important thing that I think you have to understand when you start your own company, your own team, is that the biggest difference is actually money. Because you stop doing this for your education, and the moment you start a company, you actually work out of your own pocket in some way or another. Even if you have funding from the county or the state or European Union or so, sooner or later you will pay back. So you should have a pretty good idea of how you use that money and time. It's not for free. There are generally two ways to get funding for a game company. One is to get money from the EU. That usually comes with a shitload of work. That might not be obvious from the start, because you read all those nice booklets about, we got funding for serious games we got funding maybe from the Red Cross here, maybe we got funding from some university network there. The problem is that you have to provide a lot of paperwork to actually make it through those funding rounds, and you have to be prepared to deal with that. So this is actually time that goes out of your available man days for developing a game, and you need someone who will deal with that. The other way to get funding is to go after private money somehow. There's funds all over Europe that try to give money to startup companies. But even there, you will have to deal with a little bit of paperwork, maybe not as much as with the European institutions, but still you have to go through some sort of due diligence, and you have to be aware that those people actually want their money back. Which is, by the way, also true for the European Union. Sooner or later, they will want their money back, and the money you can actually get for free is pretty limited, really. So be aware that you are going to have to deal with a lot of paperwork, no matter how you actually try to go for funding, and you need someone to deal with that on a constant basis. This is not something that you do at the start and then you can slack around and do just development. You actually have to stay on the ball all the time and make sure that you are always prepared to answer questions regarding your financial status and your development status. And that is probably a full-time job, actually. So get a lawyer. Part 2 of that statement is don't trust your lawyer. If your lawyer was any good, you couldn't afford him. Your lawyer is only the first step in covering your ass in legal ways. Most lawyers have no clue whatsoever about the entertainment industry. There are some lawyers who do specialize, but even those lawyers don't know everything. So you actually have to get some knowledge yourself. You should definitely talk to other people in the industry. The game industry is a pretty nice one because most people are quite chatty, and if you go to parties and trade fairs and so on, you can usually talk to people who've been there and maybe have been wrong, like I've been, for example. So the primary function of a lawyer for a team is to make sure that you get the basics right. There are certain parts of contracts and legal documents that are more or less mandatory. And yeah, you actually have to go to university and learn that stuff, so there's a reason why you pay a lawyer. But then again, there's also certain aspects that are very specific to game development. Things that are pretty complicated because they usually don't appear in the contracts that lawyers deal with when they are working locally. And with locally, I mean within one country or even one continent. The whole question of licensing stuff, be it you licensing some technology or licensing some IP to use in a game, or you licensing your work out to someone else to actually sell it, that can be pretty complicated. You have to think about how long is a license valid, what does it cover exactly, what platforms may I work on, what platforms might be excluded, am I actually going to be paid if someone uses my IP for a completely different thing, like maybe a book. You never know. There have been books made after computer games, and there actually have been made movies, very, very bad movies out of computer games. And if you've been the game designer who maybe, created the actual storyline for such a game and for the resulting movie, then you better make sure that you actually get paid for it. You don't want Uwe Boll to get everything on. Not for the work he's doing. So yeah, legal stuff is a major pain in the ass. It is not fun dealing with those things, but you will regret it later. And you have to get those questions out of the way pretty soon. The first question you have to get out of the way when you found a team is who actually owns everything we do? What percentages of this company are lying where? What are the rights of the shareholders? What happens if someone wants to get out? Or what happens if the rest of the team wants someone out? You better get those questions out of the way really, really soon. So everybody knows what's in for them. One really important thing to realize about all those contracts and legal stuff is that contracts are not for the time when everything's running fine. Contracts are for when you are really, really fucked up. When you really disagree about something, when your publisher wants you dead, when someone on the team wants you dead, when someone wants to get you into debt until the universe stops or so. So your contracts are a means to make sure that when things go bad, you don't get destroyed forever. So when you start as a fresh team, you usually think about contracts in a way that is this and this is fine because we all agree on this and this fact, but in fact you have to write it down. You have to write it down really, really clearly so that you avoid someone else getting after you later on. So legal things are really, really important. Equally important is getting your bookkeeping right. That is something that no one wants to deal with either, but you still have to do it. Not only for the reason that you actually want to know if your company is stable and is actually making money or not, but also to know what the percentages of what actually are. Even if the tax authorities don't come after you like right away, they will later on, and then you'll have to be able to say how much money you actually made, and you want to be able to tell them that, yeah, actually we made that much money, but we all spent it on hardware. And you actually have to prove that. Otherwise you will end up paying lots of taxes on it, and you don't want to do that, especially if you didn't actually get the money in there. So make sure that someone is dealing with all the bookkeeping. In my experience, it's usually best to get someone external to that. It's not necessarily a full-time job for a team of, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 people. So get a good tax lawyer and let him handle that stuff, and you concentrate on the game development and the things that you have to deal with. Whenever you are dealing with the outside of your team, be it publishers, lawyers, contractors, you should make sure that you have one communicator on your team. One people who is the external face for your team, so that the language is always the same, so that your language is consistent. You can go a long way with bullshitting around, but your bullshitting should be consistent. Your communicator should be someone who actually wants to communicate. That sounds obvious, but actually many teams end up not having someone who actually wants to communicate. You actually have to enjoy going to trade fairs and talk about your project for 12 hours without end. You also have to realize that you might have multiple people on your team who would like to go to trade fairs and talk all day about this project. Don't do that. At the start, it's usually some kind of a setback for other members of the team that they are not allowed to go around and push your project. But it's really, really better if you have one voice that is always visible, that is always available, that everybody knows. It doesn't help to have a pretty girl do that. It does help to have a pretty girl do that. This whole question of having one voice externally is really a matter of trust. The rest of the team does have to trust that person to do that job properly. And you also have to realize that this is a job that has to be done properly. So it takes time. This is a time investment. This is time that goes out of your budget for development time. So be prepared to account for that. On the other hand, that person doing this part of communication has to give credit where credit is due. This person should not run around and pretend that he or she is doing everything themselves. There is a team. No computer game nowadays can really be done by a single person, or at least not on a commercial level. So always make it clear that there is a team behind that, and try to work with that fact by pointing out how strong your team is, how experienced people are, how creative they are, and what cool things they've done before. If you look at the websites of young teams, then you will find that the good websites always brag about just about any project anyone on the team ever touched, even remotely. This is called marketing. You have to do it. Your communicator should not only deal with publishers, you should also be able to deal with the press. you want to be, you have to attack the press pretty early, not just because you want to sell that first game that you're doing, but because you actually have to sell a game after that. Many teams run into the trap of focusing on their current project so much that they forget about what to do after that. And you need to have a plan for when your project is actually done. So to keep that momentum, you need someone who is able to talk to people about the future of your company, not just the current project. As the last thing about legal stuff and contracts and so on, this also sounds obvious, but isn't that often. Don't work for free or based on promises. You may know the people you are dealing with, you may think they are completely reliable, but as a matter of fact, they can go bankrupt as well. So when you are doing contract work for someone, or you are doing a full game project for someone, make sure you actually get paid, or you actually retain the IP rights to the work you have done. There are lots and lots of things that can go wrong. Not all of those things are necessarily to be blamed on your partners directly. They can be quite external. An example I'd like to give is a game that my company worked on for nearly half a year, and that game didn't really make it. The reason for this was that this game was based on a pretty big brand, and it was a movie brand. Development was working nicely, everything was running around just fine, and then we found out that we can actually not release that game. Why? Because the director of the movie that the game is based on wasn't happy with the outcomes of the Oscars. So he didn't want to deal with that IP anymore, so he didn't give a green light on the final licensing for this brand. And then you sit there with a game based on a movie, which is really cool, and you're not allowed to release it. So whenever you deal with complex situations in terms of contracts and IPs, make sure that everything is covered. That you always have to, you have to plan for the worst. You have to be prepared for every major catastrophe that can come your way. And as the development team, you are usually the last part of the food chain. So there might be some people in front of you who actually get their money, but if there's anyone in that chain who doesn't get their money, it's you. Another thing that I see go wrong, that I have seen going wrong quite a number of times, not only with the teams that I founded myself, but also teams that I've been working with externally, is spending, or not actually spending, wasting money on things that you don't need. As I said at the start, this is all coming out of your pocket in the end, so you better have a good idea of what you spent that money for. Sitting down and spending a year to write a 3D engine is not a good business decision. If you look at the current market for 3D engines, you will find that Unreal, for example, is basically free with pretty reasonable royalties coming when you actually make money, and only then. There are other engines that are available at reasonable prices, like Unity and so on. Having 2 or 3 programmers sit down for half a year and write a 3D engine is losing money. Don't do it. You are now in university, and this is the time to do such crazy things. So do them. But not when you actually have to pay for it. Have the government pay for it right now, but don't make yourself pay for it later on. Also, you should make sure that you get your whole working environment right. This goes a long way. If your team or certain team members don't like working with the team because the working environment isn't nice, then that actually hurts productivity quite a bit. So make sure you have proper computers. I think that goes without saying. But don't waste time on building them yourselves, because that's just way too expensive. I see many teams buying stock Dell machines right out of the web shop, and that's actually a smart choice. I mean, not that I've never bought from Dell, but Dell is as good as anything. So yeah, go and buy stock computers. Don't buy top of the line, because they're going to be worthless in half a year anyway. So buy reasonable computers, but then go and actually spend your money on things that matter. Get proper input devices for your people. If someone wants some funky mouse, get them. If someone wants a specific keyboard, get it. Those are the things that make people happy every day. And not just your teammates, but also you yourself. In all my 2 studios that I founded, I actually made it mandatory. That somewhat goes against that, but I actually made it mandatory for all the programmers to use ergonomic keyboards, because it helps in the long run. Many people start out with those, typical boards that really aren't good for your health. And making your team happy also means keeping your team healthy. So if your programmers or your artists end up having broken hands after 2 years of happily hacking around for a game, then that is not going to help your business case in any way. So if you can make your working environment as ergonomic as possible, then by all means do so. You also should have a good look at your software environment. Many things tend to get ignored at the start of a project for a private development team. One of my pet peeves is version control systems. Many people simply ignore that problem, and it's going to cost you a lot of time later on. So you should get this thing out of the way right from the start. And Subversion is not a version control system. Subversion is a joke. So get something that works, really works. There are tons of free version control systems you can use: Mercurial, Git, and for small teams, actually Perforce as well. And those actually work. So forget about SVN or CVS. Those are not the basis for actual teamwork. In terms of tools, you also should shell out a little bit of money to get the pro tools. Blender, for example, might be nice for some hobby-grade game projects where you have all the time to figure out all the little glitches and so on. But if you have to work in a professional environment where you actually want to be able to take on people, other talent that are supposed to work with you or for you, then you have to be prepared to provide the proper tools. And in the art department, there is simply no way around Photoshop, at least none that I know of. GIMP is not an alternative for Photoshop. It's a nice toy, but nothing more. And for the 3D part, you can go Maya or you can go 3D Max, but that's about it. All those smaller tools like Cinema or Blender or whatever, they may save you a lot of money in the first place, but you will regret it later. Especially if you have to work with external art departments for example, marketing purposes or so on, this will bite you badly. The same goes for the programmers. Programmers should have a proper working environment. The students that were in my courses know that I'm a big fan of Visual Assist, for example. Visual Assist does save a lot of time. So that's something that you should actually spend money on. When thinking about the budget you have for development tools in art and in coding, you have to think about the platforms that you're targeting. Here at university, you have the luxury of being able to work with just about anything you want. You can do Wii development, you can do Xbox development. I don't know if, do you have PS3 already? Or? Don't think so. Okay. Something that you have to be aware of is that doing the same thing in a commercial environment can be very risky and very expensive. For example, development kits for Nintendo usually go for 5 figures if you actually have to license them. This is not something that the university has to do because universities usually get that stuff for free or at least at reasonable prices. But as a commercial team, when you want to work with, for example, the Nintendo Wii, you actually have to buy development kits. And you also have to be aware that, especially with consoles, you are in a somewhat risky position because there is no guarantee that your game will ever be released. If Microsoft or Sony or Nintendo really don't like your project, then it won't be released. And there is nothing you can do about that. So be aware of those risks. That being said, console development is financially pretty attractive. It's about the only retail market that actually makes money. No one is making, well, virtually no one is making money just from PC games anymore because the market is just too dead in the water. So when you look at the projects that you want to do, be flexible. You may set out with a project that you think can only be done on the Wii or can only be done with Kinect, but that usually isn't true. If your game idea is any good, then it will work on a number of platforms. It might even work on, let's say, the iPhone or so. So you should try to limit your risks by going onto as many platforms as possible, so that if your project doesn't work on doesn't work out properly on one platform, or there just is some major competitor on one platform, can always happen. Then you can go and sell on a different platform, maybe in a slightly different fashion, but still you have something to sell. In an extension to that principle is that you should try to have more than one project in development. And you should try to be able to sell it as well. You have probably heard in lectures that most of the games do not make money. The 80-20 rule hits again, and 80-20 is actually pretty precise here. 80% of the games actually don't make the money they cost in development. Now, big publishers like EA or Ubisoft or so know that, and they simply work with that fact. But you as a development studio with just one title can be easily killed by this risk. So you may be able to stomach one flop and maybe a second one as well, but then things get really, really scary. And you should forget about the idea of having superior game design and superior production values, and then the project will sell itself. It won't. The production values of games rarely have something to do with their success in the marketplace. Farmville is, I think, the primary example for that. There are no production values whatsoever in that game. It's making millions every day. So people like cheap stuff. So in game development, you generally have to think about your actual audience. Your audience is not other game designers. Your audience is usually not someone who went to university. Your audience is the broad masses. Game game development is not a niche market anymore. It's a big business. You probably heard that 1,000 times already. It's bigger than movies. So you have to cater to the broad masses. So if anything, try to remember that your customers are not experts in game design. Okay. Big risks in game development usually come with really, really crappy deals. When you work for a publisher like EA or Ubisoft or whoever, you will find that they are usually fine when you are late or if your project doesn't work out the way it was planned to be. And they are pretty cooperative when it comes to that, but that comes out at a price. They usually want a percentage of your studio. And the one thing I can tell you about that is don't sell out, ever. If you find yourself in a position that you risk losing the majority ownership of your studio, then you should cut your losses and just start over. Do not sell like 60% or so of your studio to any major. It doesn't matter how nice they are. It doesn't matter how well you got along so far. This will bite you sooner or later. If a big company like EA re-evaluates its policies and comes to the conclusion that having 5 studios in Sweden probably doesn't make much sense, so let's put them all together in Stockholm and make it one big one, then you have no leverage whatsoever to fight that if you don't have that majority in your company anymore. And you probably don't want to be shuffled around like the majority of American developers are currently. So my advice here is to cut your losses and run. Your lifespan as a game developer is limited, and there are only so many projects that you can do during your professional time. And while someone like EA is producing 20 or 30 games in a year, you can be happy if you get to make 20 games in your whole lifetime. So if you work for 2 years on a game, I think you can figure out how many games you are going to do. So try to make them worthwhile. You don't want to work on crappy stuff just because someone pays you for it. That's not why you go into game development. There are easier jobs for that. So you should try to limit the risks you go for. You should try to have more than one project, at least in the concept stage. And you should avoid being owned by someone, no matter how nice they are. A large part of the potential success of game projects nowadays is connected to how well they do online. Facebook has been mentioned before. I don't understand the word of Swedish, but that I did understand. Facebook is pretty important right now. There probably will be something else around in 5 years, but there will be something. And an important thing is to treat your fans well. It doesn't matter how small your team is or how small your game is, you will have fans. And you should cater to them. Your fans will be complete weirdos. You have to be aware of that. If you are a team of like 5 people coming up with a game like Chrysanthemum, for example, do you know that game?
No. It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, okay, it was really weird. But there will be fans for something like that. And your fans are actually something that you should nurture. You can do events with your fans. They are really crazy about the stuff that you do. And my company, for example, has been dragging around a crowd of 20 guys about that, who've been following our work for now 12 years. And they love everything we do. And I don't know why.
but they're active on our website. They comment on our Facebook stuff. They love everything we do. And there's nothing better than to have a stable fan base that actually multiplies the efforts that you do in terms of marketing. Viral marketing is kind of a buzzword, but it can work. So there is a big difference between you, your team, or your spokesperson going out and praising your next project as being the best thing since sliced bread. If someone else who isn't actually connected to your team and who is actually just some random customer, or at least looks like he is, if such a person goes out and says, this is totally cool, you actually have to see it, you really, really need to see that, then that goes a long way. Especially on platforms like Facebook, where the network of your crazy fans is a completely different network than yours. Your network will primarily be targeted at people from the same industry. At least that's my experience. Most game developers are primarily connected to other game developers. So that is not your target audience. Your crazy fans, those are your target audience and the people they know. So treat your fans nice. If you do, they will follow you for a long time. So the final message I have for you, and that is something that I see go wrong like every week, is you should get people who know stuff if you need someone who knows stuff. You have probably seen more than one online game fail because the servers didn't work, or the login system didn't work, or account services didn't work, or it didn't scale, or whatever. And I see this problem at least once a month with some team where I do consulting, and people are often surprised by the amount of people trying to look at the game when it becomes known. And this, now in internet time, this can be really, really quick. And you may not be prepared to handle that. And you should get someone with experience to look over your stuff and try to figure out what could go wrong before it does. Once your project is online and failed because you didn't, I don't know what, maybe your database setup sucks, or your website is using a stupid CMS system. It doesn't really matter what fails. If your site, if your game site fails, then that will damage you forever. There has been one really nice example recently, Settlers Online. I don't know how big the Settlers brand is in Sweden, but I can tell you that in Germany it's one of the strongest brands ever. And those guys went online, and just after a few hours, everything fell apart. And after that, they've been offline for a week, because that was how long it took them to figure out what went wrong. And those guys have been in development for over a year. And they could have figured that out earlier, or they could simply listen to me. I don't claim that I'm the only one who knows about that stuff, but the important thing is that go and ask someone who does. There are quite a few factors that can go wrong, and not all of them are obvious. And you actually have to plan for large numbers of players. And actually, even if you test here at the university, you are testing with, I don't know, 50 users, 100 users, 150 users. But if your game catches on through some viral effect that nobody really understands, even though they throw around PowerPoint presentations claiming they know all the time, then you suddenly have to deal with thousands of users at the same time. And it's not like you simply go and buy 10 times as many servers or so. It doesn't work that way. You actually will need expertise for that. And unfortunately, you can't test that yourself. There's simply no way to test something like this. You actually need someone to look over your stuff before you fail. Okay, so that would basically be my my guidelines for forming a new studio. There's obviously a few more things to be said, but time is limited. The one thing you should always remember is you're in it for the fun. Game development should be fun, and you should try to minimize the factors that are not fun, like going bankrupt or being sued, or or working long hours, for example. Game development is fun, and most game developers I know actually have the problem that they have no hobby anymore, because game development used to be their hobby, and then suddenly it's work, and at some point it will stop being your hobby. So that's that's some advice from an old guy: get a different hobby. Try to minimize the risks of it stopping being fun by getting advice from people who know how to deal with things. Lawyers, tax accountants, experts from the industry. Try not to do that stuff yourself because you will fail. It actually takes some knowledge to deal with certain aspects of game development that actually aren't connected to game development itself. As a gamer, you probably are aware that if you buy a game as an original disc, you are actually being punished for being honest. You have some crappy copy protection that puts your computer at risk. Sony rootkit, anyone? And the other publishers do the same shit. So for the gamer, it's a lose. For the developer, it's a lose. It's even a lose for the publisher, but they don't believe it. But most of the copy protection schemes that you can use cost somewhere between 50 cents and 2 euros per disk. So that's a lot of revenue going down the drain. And you should really think about if you need that really. The online distribution platforms usually don't need that anyway. Stuff like online activation is fine, for example. No problem with license keys as long as they don't install some shit on my system. So if I had any word in that, DRM wouldn't be anywhere.
How come the PC gets such a bad rap nowadays? I mean, how come we can't make fun of it anymore?
The PC, the market for PC games doesn't have a bad reputation. It just isn't there. Part of the problem is that it's very easy to make a PC game. So that means there's lots and lots of crap out there. The available range of PC games is much broader than it is for consoles or mobile. And so the overall quality is very low. Another problem is that the revenues on PC games are pretty bad. The shelf life of a typical PC game is something between 6 and 8 weeks. If you haven't made money in the first 6 weeks of selling the game, you won't ever. All that stuff about long tail and so on, that may work for a title like Sims, but that's about it. Or World of Warcraft, obviously, but yeah. Don't even try to build your business case on becoming the next World of Warcraft. There's a reason they're Blizzard. So yeah, the problem is that it's very hard to make money just on PC games. And the margins with console games are much better. I mean, if you look at the prices for a console game, they stay at like 60 euros for months. You can't ever do that with a PC game. That market just isn't there.
But that's retail distribution, right?
Yeah. With online, things are a little bit different. But with online, you also have the problem that the distribution channels on the consoles and on mobile are way better than on a PC, because on PC there is no single distribution channel. You could say Steam, okay. But apart from that, if you don't want to go on Steam, there is no single way to distribute your game. I mean, I think we can agree on Games for Windows Live being not the ideal platform. And Steam may be pretty big, but Steam takes a huge chunk of money out of your revenue. I mean, 40% is okay if you have a retail deal, but 40% for online distribution is just extortion.
How big is that number for, say, Xbox Live Arcade versus console distribution?
That depends on a number of factors. If you are a first-party developer with Microsoft, for example, on Xbox, your deals may or may not be better than if you go through EA or Ubisoft. With online distribution through Xbox Live Arcade or so, I think the conditions are pretty good, actually. Compared to having to shell out for discs that you may or may not sell in the end. Like, for example, with Nintendo, if you want to publish your game on any of the Nintendo platforms, you actually have to go and buy the media, and Nintendo tells you how many. Nintendo goes and says, okay, we think you can sell 300,000 units of this game, so you now have to buy 300,000 units from us, and then you can go and sell them. So that's a huge financial risk. But on the other hand, Nintendo is a pretty safe platform. So if you can do that, your chances are pretty good to actually get that money back. But licensing deals in general, especially with closed platforms, yeah, that is something that you probably aren't going to do yourself anyway. On Nintendo and Sony, you can't even get a publishing deal without having a publisher in the first place. With Sony, at least, and Nintendo as well, really, you can't even get development kits without having a publisher that has already signed the deal for this project. So your options are somewhat limited there. Other questions? Perfect. Hey, I'm spot on. Thank you.